Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Krashy, and today we're going to be doing a very fun video, something I'm very excited about, talking about my thoughts, my feelings, and comparing Paragon the Overprime versus Predecessor. Now, I last played Predecessor, I think back in May on one of their early access stress tests, whatever it was called, and most recently we had the final test of Paragon the Overprime, of which both of these games, for context for anybody that's following me from different channels or different social media, these are both Paragon remakes. They are like the last two Paragon remakes surviving. One is called Paragon the Overprime, what is called Predecessor. They look similarly, the characters are similar, the same, but very, very different games, and I'm here to talk about the differences, which one I like more, which one I'm more excited about, and yeah, to give my kind of thoughts and feelings on it. So, most recently, we had Paragon the Overprime in its final test, and we have Predecessor coming up in early access on December 1st, and then Paragon the Overprime is going to go into early access on December 8th. So these games are clearly rivaling each other, trying to be the big winner of the Paragon remakes. Now, let's go ahead and touch on Paragon the Overprime, the game that I played a lot of very recently. It's a really good game. I like it quite a bit. I think that the game has a lot of polish to it in the way that it looks, but did not feel very polished in the way that it felt. I had a lot of issues with performance, with hitching and lag, and I'm not sure, it's weird, it didn't quite feel like servers or like connectivity. It felt more like the game itself, like the actual game, the way that they felt to play the game. A lot of hitching, getting stuck on stuff, clipping into things, or, snagging up on walls while using abilities, teleporting, little things like that. So it definitely felt like a lack of polish, in the sense that the game itself wasn't quite finished or well optimized. I'm not exactly sure the right terminology to use here, but in terms of look, presentation, UI specifically, I think that Paragon the Overprime felt really, really good. Now, another thing that they absolutely had down was the skins. I think some of the skins in Paragon the Overprime are crazy cool. Such cool cosmetics that I saw. Probably my favorite for all of Paragon the Overprime was, let me think, there is a red recolor, kind of like armored looking Grux skin, and there is the really, I don't even know what to call it, crazy looking Kalari skin, of which I think were both really, really cool. But yeah, Paragon the Overprime, it felt very, very hitchy, laggy, performance not so great, but was pretty solid. Now, let's go ahead and touch on Predecessor, and then my some general thoughts on Predecessor, and then I'll kind of compare the two. So, Predecessor, when I played it back in May, had kind of a different feel to it, almost the opposite feel to it. It felt very polished in the gameplay sense, very responsive. Oh, that's another thing about Paragon the Overprime. Did not feel very responsive. Like when you hit something, it's almost like I wasn't sure if I hit it. So the game didn't feel super responsive. Kind of, again, talking about the performance, but Predecessor felt very responsive. It felt very clean to play. The gameplay felt very, very solid, snappy. Like I felt like when I hit, when I moved, when I was maneuvering, everything felt very, very clean. But I will say that the Predecessor UI and the overall polish of the game in terms of presentation was lacking. So it's actually, it almost feels like they are quite opposite of each other, where Paragon the Overprime feels like the presentation, the UI, the look of the game, and the skins, some of the design was better in, mostly across the board. The gameplay wasn't quite there, but on Predecessor, it felt like the gameplay and the feeling of actually playing the game felt much, much better than Paragon the Overprime. But some of the presentation and the UI felt a little lacking, felt a little basic. Some of the menus on Predecessor are really, really big, and they kind of block the screen, and just overall some of the UI elements are just kind of really bland looking and are not very great. But overall, I think the gameplay felt very, very clean. Now, some of the major differences between the two, because this is where I want to start to compare them, is the fact that while they do have some of the same characters, the character designs are actually pretty different. I can't even speak to them entirely, but obviously item building and things like that is all going to be different, but the actual character designs are rather different. So there's different balance, obviously. So, you might have a character that you're familiar with, but it plays very, very different. But this is kind of the semantics of discussing the differences, because I think it's obvious that two different games are going to have different balance to them. But the major differences, in my opinion, is the just like the game loop. That's what I'm looking for, the game loop. Playing on 2 completely different maps that have very different objectives, that have different types of balance in terms of how you move. The probably number 1 difference between the 2 games is the way that mobility is handled. Now, in Paragon the Overprime, there is a thing called sprint mode. Now, sprint mode, you can press your shift key, it will start to activate you turning on your sprint, and as you're activating your sprint, you will go into sprint mode. If you are hit with an ability or with an auto attack while sprinting, it will snare you, and the map, because of this kind of a system, is incredibly large. So Paragon the Overprime has a very, very large map that has these teleporters, so you can like teleport between lanes, across the map, and have this sprint mode where you're running around, you're running through the bushes, which I'm going to touch on here in a second. Whereas mobility in Predecessor is much more reined in. Everybody is just at this like strong jog or like a run, standard move speed, and then everybody has a flash, a blink, whatever you want to call it, a resource, an ability where they can do a teleport. So in my personal opinion, I really do not like the Paragon the Overprime sprint mode. I think again, it makes the map really, really big, or allows them to make the map really, really big, and has these portals on the map. Now, I don't like the portals. I feel like the portals it's so much mobility just for existing, and then they go on cooldown. It gives people the opportunity to just like port away from you, and then you can't kill them, and you can heavy gank a lane really, really quickly. And I don't know, just something about it just felt like I didn't really care for that. I didn't really care for that overall, as well as the sprint mode. I think that the balance to the sprint mode is that you do get snared, but it almost feels like they had to do that because otherwise you can just sprint and run away. And so I'm just not a huge fan of it. I personally like the more kind of traditional MOBA feel that Predecessor has with, everybody having like a blink, because the blink, I believe, has like a 300-second cooldown, like a really, really long cooldown. And, that if someone blinks, then you can kind of time that as a resource and use that against them to know that they're gankable or that they don't have their blink. And it just felt much more MOBA feeling to me over the kind of uniqueness that is the sprint mode in Paragon the Overprime. Now, I will say it is cool, and you can definitely maneuver yourself, like around a corner, turn on your sprint mode so that way you don't get snared or stopped, and then you can sprint away and get away. So you can definitely make some cool plays, and I don't think it's bad. I just don't prefer it to the kind of blink mobility system that is in Predecessor. So I actually do think that it's a good thing. Don't get me wrong. I just prefer Predecessor to, with their kind of resource blink as an ability over what Paragon the Overprime has with the sprint mode. Now, as far as Paragon the Overprime having bushes, I do think this is something I want to talk about. It's interesting. I like the concept of bushes in MOBAs because it's a very, very standard thing that most MOBAs will have. Bushes that, you can you can kind of hide in and, gank from. It has a nice MOBA feel to it, but it's really bizarre in Paragon the Overprime for me that the bushes are like, they're very animated and they rustle around a lot, so they don't quite provide the concealment that I think that a bush should have, although it's kind of nice that you can also see that there's someone in there. But I don't know, there's just something about it that I don't really quite care for. Whereas the kind of vision and anti-vision that is in Predecessor is strictly based on these like vision walls that are up in the jungle. So if you are outside the, the vision wall of the jungle, you can't see inside of it unless you have a ward in there. And if you step inside of the jungle vision, then you can see and kind of clue yourself into what exactly is going on. So again, it's just another one of those things that I really do prefer not having bushes in Paragon, or a Paragon Remake. But Paragon the Overprime has these bushes that you can like run through and rustle through, and you can kind of see when someone's in there, but you can get ganked from it. Whereas Predecessor just has these giant vision walls that you have to be very aware of and keep good vision around the map through the usage of wards, which I definitely prefer. As far as the map goes itself and some of the objectives, I definitely think that the Paragon the Overprime map, I think it looks aesthetically a bit more pleasing, but it's not as good a map as the Predecessor map is. Now, aesthetically speaking, again, just the way the design of the map looks, I think that it's actually very beautiful and really nice, very lightly colored. The Predecessor map is a little bit more gloomy, a little bit more jungly inherently, like actually like a jungle, but the actual design of the map for Predecessor, in my opinion, is much better. It actually has a much more defined like grooves to it, where you don't quite have vision in areas and you can't quite see everything, where the Paragon the Overprime map feels much more open and much more free to give you vision. For example, if you're in the off lane in Paragon the Overprime, you can quite literally tilt your head to the side, off the edge of your lane, and kind of see down into the jungle. And I don't know, I just didn't really care for that personally. Whereas when you're in lane in Predecessor, you don't really have much of any vision. You're kind of on like a dead path, and anybody can pop out at any second. So you really have to be warding and getting vision for yourself. The game flow in terms of Paragon the Overprime feels very snowbally to me. It feels like the team that gets ahead pretty much always stays ahead and then can close out the game. Whereas in Predecessor, the games felt a little bit shorter, and it felt like it wasn't as slow a bleed out, and it felt like there were very clear opportunities to kind of make a comeback. Now, I do think that could still be said about Paragon the Overprime as well, but in my personal opinion, and you can obviously see that I have definitely preferred Predecessor to Paragon the Overprime almost across the board, except in maybe UI elements and presentation. It just feels like a much more polished, refined version of a completed MOBA, and I really do appreciate what they have built. So friends, I think that is mostly what I want to touch on. I do think that both games are actually very good. I think that you're definitely going to be able to pick one of them and make a preference for yourself. And most likely what I anticipate going forward with the future of the Paragon remakes is that one of them will most likely rise to popularity, and the other one will maybe kind of like fall a little bit into obscurity, and we will just have to see how well each of them do. But I hope for success for both of these games. I'm definitely more personally excited to play Predecessor and to get my hands onto Predecessor. As far as character design goes, both games felt great. As far as item building goes, it felt very MOBA tree, spending gold, buying items, so not really much to compare there. I don't really have a lot of thoughts on the items or balance of the games because I'm still just so very new to the games, but I did have a lot of fun playing both of them, and I'm very much so looking forward to December 1st for Predecessor, and maybe even some more content on this channel in the second week of December with Paragon the Overprime. So friends, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel for future Predecessor, Paragon content. As always, be sure to be kind to one another, tell someone you love them, and I'll see you on the next video.